So as we think about religious freedom here in this country, I think it might be a little easy to get complacent about what that is, a little bit like the goldfish in the bowl, where they might not know that the water's even there. Well, how's the water in other countries? What's it like, and what is it that we ought to notice and maybe cherish or think about a little more carefully here in this country?
Wow, that's absolutely true. We are not aware of the kind of discrimination and coercion that you see in the rest of the world. I always like to talk about this one standard that Pew Research puts out every year. It's the status of religious freedom around the world. And they said this year that 83% of people in our world, on Earth, are under some kind of religious persecution by their government. So they don't live in free countries, not like ours, where you have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, where you can say and worship and believe in whatever it is that you want to believe in. Whatever way God moves you or doesn't move you, you are free to do that in this country. Some examples of that are egregious: canceling Christmas, that happened in Cuba many years ago. The Pope's visit was something that was just controversial because people didn't know how to worship anymore because they weren't allowed to do it. Churches were these beautiful buildings where no one went to worship. You have other examples of that. In Mexico, religious groups weren't allowed to own property. So if a religious school wanted to exist, it had to ask members of the community to buy the building and own it without and lend it to a religious community. They weren't actually allowed to own property. EWTN, which is a very well-known business and religious business that has TV, radio stations, wouldn't exist and probably wasn't allowed to exist in Mexico. So those are just a couple of examples, but there are many places around the world where you worship in fear or you don't worship at all.
And can I say, here's why that's important. If you think, well, why should I care about that? Maybe you're not religious, or maybe you feel like your religion is not being persecuted. The best way to think about it is to think about, well, what really does matter to you? What's really important to your identity of who you are and what you believe and what you think is okay to do and what you think you wouldn't do. And then imagine living under a government that didn't let you live and think and have that identity. It's really kind of a chilling idea. The wonderful thing about being Americans is that most of us really do get to walk around and exist in that kind of freedom. But it's important to realize it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from having a Bill of Rights that protects the ability of you to think what you think and your neighbor to think what she thinks, and to give the government the requirement to be kind of hands-off and let us all come to those views about what do we think we're really supposed to do in the world, what do we believe, how do we believe it, how do we act on it. That's the freedom that we're talking about. And so whether you're religious or not religious, the idea of handing that over to the government and letting the government control us on those things should be a very scary idea to all of us.